Each of the four Gospels, and actually the entire New Testament, want to answer three questions for us. The first question is, who is Jesus? And the second question is, why did he die? And the third question, and then what does this have to do with us? Or as one of my teachers used to put it very bluntly, so what? Our liturgical year, or as I prefer to call it, the year of grace, presents in word and action and ritual and symbol answers to these same questions. Advent and Christmas time tell us about who Jesus is. We meet the person of Jesus. We're told about his origin in God, that he is only begotten of the Father, and yet now he comes to dwell among us, human like us, his birth among us, and how all that took place. And then during Lent and Easter season, we consider the meaning of Jesus' suffering and his death and also his resurrection. And then the rest of the year, which we call now ordinary time, it shows what this has to do with us. What does the person of Jesus and his death and resurrection mean to us? And how do we live then our Christian faith and hope and love day by day? Today's celebration, the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord, summarizes the past 6 weeks, the seasons of Advent and of Christmas, which now is about to end. And we have in our first reading one of the prophecies of Advent, looking forward to the coming of the Lord and his saving of the people. Our second reading this morning is the same epistle we read on Christmas. So who is this child so long awaited, whom prophets foretold? Who is this child now born for us? He is the Christ. He is the Anointed One. He is the Word made flesh. He is the King of all nations. Most importantly, as we hear today, he is the beloved Son of God. But even though we have learned all these titles and know these descriptions of Jesus, we want to know more about him. And not just to know about him, but to really know him. We want to have what he offers us, which is a very deep and personal friendship with him. And we will come to know him better this coming year in a deeper way than ever before, and I think in a more practical way than we have before. And I say that because this year, most of the readings from the Gospel will be from the Gospel according to Luke. And Luke will be our mutual friend with Jesus, and he will be our companion as we walk with Jesus on his journey. We will come to know Jesus Christ just as Luke knows him, and Luke knows Christ in the same way that you and I do. Because remember, Luke was not one of the original 12 apostles, as was Matthew and John. And he wasn't even among the first of the disciples, that little group of additional people that had gathered around Jesus, as we believe St. Mark was. Rather, Luke came to know Jesus through the preaching of the Apostle Paul. And Paul himself was not one of the 12. Paul came to know Jesus only after his death and resurrection and the first Pentecost. Paul did not meet Jesus face to face. He did not see him personally. Rather, he met Jesus through a vision, an appearance, while Paul was on the road to Damascus trying to round up the members of this new Christian community and get rid of them. So, just like us, Luke knows Jesus through the stories others tell, through the teachings of those who did see Jesus in person, or those who encountered him, like the Apostle Paul, in a very powerful way. At the beginning of Luke's Gospel, he writes, and we're going to hear these words in a few weeks, Luke writes, "Many have tried to tell the story of what God has done among us. They wrote what we had been told by the ones who were there in the beginning and saw what had happened. So I made a careful study of everything and decided to write and tell you exactly what took place. And I've done this to let you know the truth about what you have heard." And so, although Luke was not there personally, Luke took in what he had been told, what he had been taught, what he had learned. And, as Luke describes also Mary, the mother of Jesus, Luke took these teachings, these stories, reflected on them deeply within himself. He listened very carefully, and by the power of the Spirit, he also experienced for himself what the others had come to know. And so the good news of Jesus became his own good news, and that's the good news that will be shared with us through his writing of the gospel. That's what Luke wants for you and me, to take in these teachings, these stories, make them our own, and realize for ourselves the presence of Jesus in our lives. So if we look at the entire Gospel of Luke, we see, first of all, a message that's meant for everyone. Luke did not write just for a Jewish community or just for a Gentile community. He wrote for everyone. And he saw how the little community of Jewish believers gradually began to grow in the power of the Spirit and become a community of churches, one body of Christ throughout the whole world. We will see through Luke's eyes the power of the Spirit that descends upon Jesus in his baptisms. We heard just a moment ago in the gospel, and how again and again Jesus will experience that power of the Spirit working within him as he heals and teaches and gathers his community together. And Luke will then show us also how that same Spirit comes upon the first apostles at Pentecost and is also shared with all of us. And then Luke wants to tell us that it's not just the Spirit that we receive once in a while in a moment of prayer or religious experience, but rather we live in the Spirit. We live a different way of life. And what Luke wants to show us is a different way of living because of the Spirit, a simpler lifestyle. He wants to show us what it would be like to live free of anxiety and concern about money and possessions and all the things of this world, and a life that instead is filled with compassion and with mercy and especially with joy. Now, there's been many, many people throughout the generations that have taken all of this to heart and have lived it very deeply. I think perhaps one of the most famous would be Francis of Assisi. As we know, he literally left behind all his possessions and then joyfully sought to follow Jesus as a companion, and that he kind of, in a sense, really lived out completely the spirit of Luke's gospel. But I also think of how often our modern day Francis, our Holy Father Francis, often calls us to that same simplicity and to that same joy in the Lord. So in Luke's own words, not only do we receive and hear these good things, but we go and do the same. We are the living gospel for others to hear. And through this year, we will be invited by Luke again and again to do what we so often hear at the end of the Mass, to go and announce the gospel, the good news of the Lord.